Howdy, friends. You're listening to How the West Was Cast, a podcast dedicated to the best of the Western movie genre.
Well, I found Ellie after her family was robbed and murdered on the Overland Trail. She unhitched a horse from their stage and followed suit. I didn't want company, but she followed me till I took to her.
Oh.
Ellie don't look like much, but she's become the fastest quick draw I ever saw.
I see it ain't your first time.
Ruth joined us when we passed through Ridgeway. She'd been clinging to her dead husband's corpse for 2 days. She left his rotten flesh for the promise of revenge. These brutes are all the same. But once you get a man in bed, he's got nowhere to hide.
That was a scene from The Good Time Girls, a powerful short western written and directed by Courtney Hoffman. And on this very special episode of How the West Was Cast, we'll speak with Courtney about making that film and about her acclaimed costume designs for Jared Moshe's Dead Man's Burden and Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight. Hello, my name is Matthew Chernoff, and I'm a screenwriter and an entertainment journalist in Los Angeles.
And I'm Andrew Patrick Nelson, a film historian and the chair of the Department of Film and Media Arts at the University of Utah.
Now, Andrew, when you first told me that Courtney had agreed to join us on the show, I could not have been more excited. Her costumes for The Hateful Eight are, to my mind, the most original and dazzling Western costumes I've seen in decades. Rather than just aiming for period authenticity, Courtney's work in this film reaches far beyond that, achieving a kind of stylized look that resembles something you might see in a comic book. And when you factor in her fantastic short film, The Good Time Girls, well, it's clear that she is a major new voice in the Western genre.
I agree. I first saw The Good Time Girls a few years ago and was impressed by how the movie staked out a confident middle ground of sorts between the alternative histories of Quentin Tarantino's recent films and the creative potential of elevating some of the Western supporting players to heroes, exemplified in a movie like The Ballad of Lefty Brown, written and directed by a friend of the podcast, Jared Moshe, which makes sense given that these are two filmmakers Hoffman has worked with.
It's impressive that after achieving huge success in the field of costume design, she's now decided to focus her attention on directing instead. It's quite a bold move there. But in a way, it makes perfect sense, especially when you consider how closely and intimately a costume designer like Courtney works with actors. There's really a relationship that develops there that she talks about in this interview, where she really gets to know these people and become almost like a friend of the family, or at one point she almost refers to herself as a fellow sister with some of these actors. So it's interesting that she would take this bold career risk, and it just looks to be paying off because her work in Good Time Girls is feature-length quality.
Yeah, I mean, she certainly speaks in ways that you like to hear filmmakers speak about the collaborative nature of the project, but also talking about how she's really learned from great examples of celebrated filmmakers who are nevertheless there at these important collaborative moments. And clearly she's learned a lot from these men and is taking things in her own direction.
Now, for listeners who haven't seen Courtney's Western, The Good Time Girls, yet and want to take a look at it, you can find the film on YouTube and on Vimeo. Just search for The Good Time Girls. The entire 15-minute film is there. Or you can go to CourtneyHoffmanDirects.com. That's all one word, CourtneyHoffmanDirects.com. The entire short film is there to watch, and we highly recommend it to listeners. Okay, then. With that said, I think it's time we say hello to Courtney Hoffman. Welcome, Courtney. It is a true pleasure to have you join us today on How the West Was Cast.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Really excited to talk to you today.
So before we discuss your work on Dead Man's Burden, The Hateful Eight, and The Good Time Girls, I'm curious to hear about your early introduction to the Western genre. Were you a Western movie fan before you started working in film, or did you come to that later?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I feel like I can't talk about my relationship to Westerns without talking about the relationship to the men in my lives. And, a lot of people grew up watching Westerns with their dad. That was not me. My dad taught me how to get manicures. I'm from LA. It was not a part of my, origin story. But as I started dating and started falling in love with different people, that was sort of my introduction. So there's like the boyfriend that loved Clint Eastwood Westerns, who introduced me to Josie Wales and Unforgiven. And then there's, the John Wayne lover. And that sort of just predated by a short period of time starting to get involved with them from a work perspective. So, as you said, Jared Moshe, that was the first movie I ever costume designed, was his first film, Dead Man's Burden. And he was very much like John Wayne all the time, The Searchers, that's his period of Westerns he loves. And then obviously working with Quentin, it opened up the spaghetti Western world. It opened up The Wild Bunch, McCabe and Mrs. Miller. And so really between those sort of that hybrid of men in my life, it was this very big influence, and it became a personal passion. And as I sort of started feeling these sort of deficits within the genre with women, I started then sort of the student becomes the teacher, and totally went so deep into my own obsession to really, define the Westerns that I loved, instead of just having them be influenced by these great male figures that were in my life.
Do you have a personal favorite era of Western? Are you like a Hollywood Technicolor 1950s Western fan primarily, or a 60s Euro Western? 70s.
Yeah, I'm very like the 70s anti-hero, so The Wild Bunch is one of my favorite Westerns, but I just love the portrayal, of this sort of when things stop being, the cowboy that we know and love to the cowboy that we have to like grow to love. So I also love Hanny Calder. I mean, I do think, there's some great merits to the 50s Westerns, but, I think what was going on in the 70s, in America is just a little more visceral to me. So the interpretation via the Western comes to life. And I love, the sort of 70s, even like, I'm going to throw a really wild one out there, this film Zachariah, which is Don Johnson's first Western. And it's this psychedelic 70s Western. And like, that also really strikes my fancy. So I like a lot of different directions, but I definitely think, the 70s hold a special place in my heart.
Well, the interview's off to a good start when a guest can reference both Henny Calder and Zachariah in the course of an answer. So
I win. Yes, I passed the test.
Very, very impressive. So props to you.
Zachariah, the first electric Western.
Far out.
Zachariah, ahead of his time.
Right on. Zachariah, Zachariah, you don't need a gun to die.
So Andrew recently curated a Western film exhibit at a museum in San Antonio, Texas. And among the items on display are several costumes worn by John Wayne. Now, since you are the expert here, what do you make of his signature looks?
His famous shirt with the buttons, the placard front shirt, they call it. I love it. Oh, I love it. And I've actually tried to use it a few times over, but the problem is it is so iconic that it is almost like the same thing as the dusters in Once Upon a Time in the West. It's such an obvious reference that I think it can be distracting. So it's a personal style I love, and I've tried to put it on a few actors, but you just immediately know exactly, if you know anything about Westerns, you just think John Wayne. Even if you do a different color, even if you try a different fabric, that is the shirt. And there's actually a really famous costume house in LA called United American Costumes, and they came up as the makers of every single one of these costumes. So you can actually find real pieces from the original True Grit, and they all have labels in them from who wore them. And so, they have a whole collection of them. I've seen and touched a lot of the clothes from these films. And, there are ones where you go, I can take this and reclaim it. And then for me, that shirt is like, leave it for John Wayne. Like, especially if you're doing it in a primary color. Just don't mess with it.
One of the things that people have said to me about the museum exhibit is we actually have a full costume from the Cowboys, and just how big John Wayne was. It almost seems inconceivable to me that a smaller man, and he was huge by that point, could possibly wear a costume that size. Does that figure into your thinking too?
There's definitely, if you think of Hateful Eight, which I was lucky enough to costume design, and, we do, obviously, I think there's a lot to be done with silhouette and scale in telling the story of who's our good guy and who's our bad guy. And, the most famous example that I've done is, Kurt Russell's jacket in that with the buffalo hides, and really wanting it to sculpt his arms and his shape to be like, he walks in the door, he's the bully. He literally looks like a bully. So I do think, same thing goes with a hat, 10-gallon hat on a 2-gallon guy doesn't really work. So, there's a lot of scale to actor, scale to character ratio you do have to consider.
Now, you studied at NYU and you got your start in theater rather than film. So how did your early focus on costume design develop? Was this a field you were always interested in?
I really originally I was a writer, and I really always wanted to work, more than any one field. And costume design to me was just a language I was very versed in. So telling stories within seams, literally, was a really natural progression for me. But it started to become clear 10 years in that it was something that I was going to sort of outgrow in a particular way, because I was working with a lot of my idols and a lot of my heroes and getting to do the kinds of stuff I was really dreaming of. And pretty quickly it felt obvious that, I think theater is still a really big part of my lifeline in terms of that character development, working with actors, being creative, gluing stuff, like however you find it, especially, I on all the movies I ever did, I was very involved in the aging of the costumes. Even if I had a whole department, I like to get my hands dirty, and especially blood. Blood is like on Good Time Girls. Anytime you see blood, it was me doing it. I just have after all the work I've done, on Quentin sets, on Jared's set, definitely having a personal controlling thing about blood is a big one for sure.
How did Dead Man's Burden come your way? You had been assistant costuming and doing stuff like this, but this was the big leap to designing a film yourself. How did he approach you on that?
I was found through him from this amazing production designer, Ruth DeYoung, and she basically, was like, my friend's doing a little indie, and at that point I was trying to make my way to be a costume designer. So I was actually the first department head attached, period. It was like just me and Jared. And now being a filmmaker and on the other side of it and getting my own films made, it's just such a sweet moment to think about that it was just like him and I brainstorming what this movie could be. And we all lived in one house in New Mexico, and it was really the thing about making westerns is it's as close as you can get to living a western, because you are literally in the middle of nowhere. You have no cell phone service. You're having to make do with what you find. You're having to make sure you don't step in cactuses every day. There is something that's so coincides with the experience of making a western and feeling, a real kinship to how people lived in the West, and, really being in these remote places. And so while I was actually on his film, I got the call from Christoph Waltz asking me to come be on Django Unchained. So I literally lived in the 1800s for a year and a half in total, because I went right from there, and then we were in Wyoming and New Orleans, and pretty much just fell in love. There was no going back after that.
Yeah, so that's the method approach to costume design.
Very method. So much. If there wasn't dirt under my fingernails at the end of every day, or weird blood stains like on my legs. Like, I'm like, what did I do? Oh no, it's just fake movie blood.
What's your name?
Django.
Can you spell it?
D-J-A-N-G-O. The D is silent.
I know.
When we had Jared on the show, he talked about the firearms in his film and how particular he was about every gun had to mean something, it had to be period authentic. Was he equally precise when it came to the costumes?
No, I think, short of like we're talking about the John Wayne shirts and the few real like iconography pieces to avoid or to, emulate, I don't remember that level of specificity. I think, we both were really learning as we go. I'll never forget like when I went to that costume shop I was telling you about that's done, name that Western, they made the clothes for it. And I said, what's a squib? Like, I didn't even know, what a squib was. It was such a learning experience. And I'm so grateful for Jared because he actually is a huge reason that I ended up writing Good Time Girls and creating in the genre. I had a drink with him, years later, and he was prepping for Ballad of Lefty Brown. And I was telling him, I was like, I have this image of, you go up a pant leg and you see the tip of a rifle and you keep going and you reveal that it's a woman. And I have this like story in my head about women. And he goes, so why don't you write it? And it was such a simple gesture, but it felt so big, like such a big leap to just go, yeah, okay, I'll go write it. And so I really give him a lot of kudos and love for that moment.
He talked a lot about his influences, Dead Man's Burden, a lot of, sort of Peckinpah. He's big into Peckinpah, but also Bud Bedecker. Were there any, particular films that you had in mind as you were costuming and approaching Dead Man's Burden?
I think, yeah, like I can't remember all of his references because, as I said, by now they've blended with,
well, there would have been a lot of them
Tarantino movies and there were a lot of Westerns then, but I don't remember what our references were for that. I mean, I can't believe how long ago it was. I think by now it's like 8 or 9 years. I don't know. When we made it, it was a while ago, but they just posted a picture from set. Oh, it was 9 years ago. And, really just, to me, it's about making sure that the costume and the storytelling, especially because they were homesteaders, it had a much more natural look than we get onto Django. And it's like, I don't give a fuck what the period looked like, let's just reinvent it. So I think he really did want a little bit more of a naturalistic and homespun approach. It was also a little bit of what can we get our hands on because we're a little short on resources, but I once went and looked at Western costumes from all the Westerns in New Mexico at an abandoned prison. Like, that's where they stored all the costumes. So there was like a gas chamber down like the street, and I'll never forget the producer like couldn't stay with me, so she just dropped me off in a New Mexico abandoned prison across from the real prison, and that's where most of our costumes came from. So
your autobiography is going to be amazing.
Thanks. There's a lot of stories for sure.
I know Matt has some sort of particular questions about the Hateful Eight, but maybe just to kind of set it up, that you sort of talked about your love of aging things and your love of blood, and I can see blood being a big part of the Hateful Eight, but the aging, maybe not so much. It seems like Quentin seemed to really want that spaghetti Western look, which is a little pristine is maybe not the right word. Yeah. So how did you kind of negotiate that when you were conceptualizing the costumes?
Well, I think if you look at the costumes from Django to Hateful Eight, I did manage to get a little more aging in there. I snuck some in because to me, I think, of course they had new clothes back then too, right? Like, they not everything is like been worn 800 times. Someone like Django can walk into a store and get a head to toe new outfit and you feel that freshness, and that's part of the story. But for Hateful Eight, it really was to get to that house in the middle of nowhere. you had to have really traveled. So to me, I think the biggest fight was probably Major Warren's cavalry coat with the bright, bright, bright yellow, because he was like, do not age a drop of it. So I think we got a little compromise where I just did the edges, just ever so much, but you're right. He's very he's aging phobic for sure.
That yellow that you mentioned is so striking. The moment when he raises his arms up and we get those yellow wings behind him, sort of, it's just a breathtaking moment. So that was written in the script ahead of time? That color was called out?
The coat was there. And then the actual coats, some of them were lined with baby blue and some of them were yellow and some of them were just navy. And because, at this point, it's the end of the war, it's after the war, it's like, anything goes. By that point, everyone's traded their buttons for some food or, so it really was like understanding the silhouettes of the war and then kind of reinventing the fashion. So like Bruce Dern is in his Confederate uniform and he's probably as close to something you'd imagine he wore right off the battlefield, but it has been some time. So those were the places where, I did my good fight. I aged what I could as far as I could. And some of it just had to be, like Daisy Domergue was very aged because she had been dragged around like a rag doll. So we could really go to town on her stuff. But, and then of course, some of the goal of having them start more pristine than they would have realistically been is giving them the space over the course of the movie to get completely desecrated, and there's a weird little fandom group that writes me very often on Instagram, almost daily, about the costumes because they're collectors of them, and it's like, did you purposely age Mannix and Warren in the end with their blood? Was it meant to be exactly the same? Or like all these questions. I'm like, God, I wish I could remember all of these answers, but it's been a long time. I've done a little bit since then too.
Now, I am sort of obsessed with hats in these films. I love a good cowboy hat, and Sam Jackson's hat in Hateful Eight is just one of the best. So where did that hat come from, and does he have a say in this too? Does the actor really work with you on picking them?
Yeah. Sam was really a conspirator and a cohort in that for sure, because Quentin, we had the biggest issues were about Major Warren's costume, and it was not picked until the day before we shot. And what that meant was that we had to make multiples of a lot of different options. So there were like 6 or 7 choices that we were trying to figure out, because I was a little against the yellow and the red, because I felt like, is he going to look like the Hamburglar? like there was just something about it to me that I was like, does he? And he actually does look like the Hamburglar.
With the hat. That is the Hamburglar hat.
It's the Hamburglar's hat. So, I mean, I've never said this to anyone. Quentin would probably kill me for even referencing it, but that was
the
my
cape, everything.
Fear.
Yeah.
Everything. Like, if you really think about it, no one's caught it. I literally was waiting for the memes or something.
Well, yeah, the McDonald Land meme where every one of the 8 is a McDonald Land character.
I mean, missed opportunity. So it's yours now. But, the hat was something that I think came a little earlier on, which was he references Lee Van Cleef's hats. I don't think he says what film, but he just says like the Lee Van Cleef. And if you think of Lee Van Cleef, he always has that very straight brim. And to have it on an older debonair black gentleman like Sam Jackson does completely reinvent it. I don't think anyone ever thought of Lee Van Cleef, but he has that same kind of elegance in it. And I think it is its own thing. But if you look at Lee Van Cleef, it's very clear where we borrowed it from.
Well, even I guess would be a touchstone there to, for a few dollars more, kind of a bounty hunter type character, actually. So that seems deliberate in retrospect.
Yeah, definitely.
Another thing I love about that hat is when he takes it off. And it's the first time we see that he's sort of bald underneath there. And this threatening, menacing character suddenly looks so much more vulnerable. He looks so much more human when he does it. It always reminds me of the moment in The Empire Strikes Back when we briefly see Darth Vader without his helmet, and he's just this bald kind of crone figure. It's such a wonderful, wonderful moment there.
I love that. That's a great reference.
I'm curious to hear what size crew do you work with on a film like Hateful Eight? Your costuming crew, how many people?
Oh, it was so huge. You know, we probably had like 20 something people just aging clothes at a certain point. And then all across the board between manufacturing, because everything was made. I mean, I had probably 150 people across the world building these things. So we had buckskin makers who were making that Zoe Bell, you know, kind of big, you know, Calamity Jane style outfit. And I really wanted to,
everything.
Exactly. And I really wanted to employ specialty, you know, creators so that everything felt handmade. I found a group of like grandmas in Portland, Oregon, who knitted Sweet Dave's sweater because I wanted that like Starsky and Hutch style sweater. And, you know, we need 10 of everything. So these people were like working around the clock, this little grandma's knitting circle, and then like found this place in Index, Wyoming. And it's Merlin's hideout. And they're the ones who do the buffalo coats. And they had made a buffalo coat, but the actual coat I wanted was actually from the Autry Museum. So I worked with them, and they let me actually go see a lot of the pieces in their collection from the 1800s. So they had done some version of a buffalo coat there, and they're the number one, like, it's technically not buffalo, it's like the American bison, but they're one of the bigger hide suppliers in the country. So I got this little town in Index, you know, we got them probably their year's worth of income in making this Kurt Russell coat, and they didn't even have a FedEx in Index. So someone had to like drive the coats somewhere else. And I mean, there was stuff being made in England. I mean, I found another grandma to make a Warren scarf here, who was selling at some flea market, and she just moved here to be with her family. And I was like, you want to make some scarves for a movie? It was crazy. I love being able to really find great craftspeople and give them a chance to shine and do what they do.
Are you personally on the set the entire production?
Yes. For Quentin's movies, you're on the set every single day because you do not know what's coming. I mean, even my supervisor, I'll never forget, he's like, why do you think we need to bring extra clothes? Like, they're 8 people, they're in the same costume the whole time. Why do you want us to bring a truck's worth of different costumes to the middle of nowhere? And I was like, because you just never know. And sure enough, when we were doing that scene where, you know, the guy sucks Sam Jackson's dick, you know, the flashback with the naked guy. And so we're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, literally the middle of a mountain in Telluride, Colorado. And Quentin goes, I think we should do a scene where he's in his clothes before all of this and, you know, get a shot of him. And it's like, here's why we brought it all.
Right.
Oh, okay. So I'm like doing a fitting in the middle, like snowmobiling clothes to me, having to do a fitting, get this guy dressed. And, you know, you really never know what's going to happen. Django, for instance, wasn't supposed to end when it did. So every single person in the scenes with Dr. Schultz, when Dr. Schultz dies, spoiler, the big scene, we'd already shot it for a few days, and Django was supposed to kill everybody at the funeral. So everybody's costumes at the funeral were multiplied and ready to be shot up, but nobody besides Schultz was supposed to die at the house at Candyland. So we had to replicate we had 1 week to go back and find fabrics that matched the fabrics of the vintage clothes they were wearing. I mean, it was Sharon Davis, who's the costume designer on that. I mean, thank God I got to follow in her footsteps with a lot less people because I got to see all the ways that he likes to keep us on our toes.
One of the funniest moments in the film for me, speaking of Kurt Russell's character, is when he takes out those glasses, his tiny little delicate eyeglasses. Is that part of the costuming department, or is that a prop? What are glasses
props.
considered?
Yeah. I think the prop master did that one.
Yeah, it's such a weird. I mean, it works in concert with this giant coat that you were talking about, the big boy coat, because he looks like a grizzly bear who's using these delicate, tiny little glasses. It's a wonderful little joke. The other hat that really stands out to me is OB's hat with
That's
the little
my favorite hat.
balls hanging off of it. So, where did those balls come from? I've been looking into it. Somebody said that that they're used in real life to keep flies and things away from people. Is it true?
Yep, it's true. So, if you're managing a stagecoach, you're going to need both your hands fully, especially a 6-horse stagecoach. You don't have the freedom to go, it's in my eye, it's in my face, so those really were a functional, while very fun and decorative piece. I have a TV show I'm developing for FX called The Fairy Fuck Mother, and I'm doing a play on that, but it has it's a bachelorette party, and it's that hat, but with little dicks. Light up dicks for a bachelorette party off of it. So that's my little ode to OB, because I love that hat so much. It's definitely my favorite one.
When you mention the amount of blood that gets used, so you have all of these backup things ready to go. When you're watching the number of costumes get stained over and over, and you're watching your backups get smaller and smaller, do you at some point have to step in and say, guys, we don't have that many more of these things left, or
oh no, you can't say that to Quentin.
No.
He doesn't care how many you have.
Okay,
what we do is we create a system where right as it starts, especially if we don't get it in the first 4, and most of the time you have, for Hateful Eight, say we had 8 of everything. And the other thing is he likes to change where he says that you're going to get shot. So somebody will be in the script shot in the leg, and it's no, actually they should be shot in the vest too. And it's well, we didn't really prepare for that. We have 4 less vests. But you can't say any of that. So basically, our best friends are the effects department, and we work in tandem to literally hand wash, blow dry, get the next, tape it, glue some fabric, whatever it takes. We keep going and keep going and keep going until there's almost nothing left of some of these clothes, and so really working, it's everyone. There's no room for anyone to not be hands-on at that point. And I have all these pictures of my department, pretending to be, ironically, all the Manson girls, because we really look like them, we're covered in some weird blood, and you're quick, I need it again. When it's well, this is already shot up 10 times. It doesn't matter. We're going to shoot it up again. And because of the way and how fast it goes, you can get away with a lot. Like I said, that scene in Django where everybody dies at Candyland, almost every one of those people is wearing the exact same pair of pants, because that was the thing we could order. We didn't have time to make it more special. That it's just same pair of pants, same pair of pants, same pair of it's just and it's so fast that, you won't really notice. But there's no being prepared. There's no being overly prepared. There's no, you're always gonna have to keep using even more.
Does that large format that he shot Hateful Eight on, does that necessitate other choices in costuming, because things are going to be seen that much clearer almost?
I mean, I always design to the bottom of a shoe, To me, it's there's no telling what direction a camera is going to be pointed in with him, and you might as well know that everybody is great head to toe. And I mean, there's lots of details on all the costumes I've ever designed that have never made it to camera, but I think at least even if it's just the actors knowing that they're there, I just go the extra mile.
Is there a particular detail in a costume that you really wish had made it on screen?
Oh God, it's so, I feel fortunate because I'm 5 or 6 years out of costume designing now, because I'm a writer director, and I let go of those things. Trying to, I think Daisy, oh wait, I found it. Daisy Domergue's corset of her dress, her top of her dress. I begged him to take her coat off because it was the most beautiful dress head to toe. And unfortunately, the dolls that they've made actually showcase the costume more than he did, because she always was wrapped up and she never untied her dress. But we embroidered all these flowers, and it was just so special that the back of it was gorgeous. I just wish for one spin you got to see her whole costume.
The backstory was something like she had been about to get on a ship to Europe or something like that when she was apprehended.
Yes.
So that explains why she was looking better than.
This very traveling and had these, she had these beautiful gloves too. The details on her gloves were really special and you never saw them either.
The gloves in this film are really important. You've got Sam Jackson's white ones and those crazy gloves that Michael Madsen is wearing. What are those? They've got these leather wrist protectors that are all laced up. It's such an odd looking glove.
I think they're kind of more of a like cowboy, we wanted him to look more like a cowboy style stuff, and we kind of wanted him to look like a cowboy doll. He didn't need to look like a real cowboy. He looked more like a cowboy doll. And it's really funny because Michael Madsen has a funny track record of stealing things from Quentin's sets. So he still has like Tori Hanzo's swords and like he'll be like, oh, I got an extra. And we're like, so every day we'd have to like double count how many gloves we got back from Madsen or how many, because he'll just take it all.
So before we move on to Good Time Girls, I'm curious to know what happens to the costumes in Hateful Eight. Do you keep tabs on where they are at every given moment right now that the film is long done?
I mean, thankfully, on Instagram, some of these collectors like to let me know where they are at all times. It does seem like they have, I have a full set at the Autry Museum who had it on showcase for probably 5 years since the movie came out. It was being showcased. And so they have a set, which to me is like, okay, I know where they are. Like my hero favorite costumes, at least, they're always just one step away in their archives. But other than that, they're like great friends you meet and you send them back into the universe and you hope they have a great life. Like, I wish I would have kept more. I wish I had a whole garage full of stuff. It was very dumb, I think, in hindsight, to not hold on to more. But, it's like by the end of it, you're so like sick of, you have such a love-hate relationship with these things because you've been through so much together.
So turning your attention to the Good Time Girls, which you both wrote and directed, how did the project originate? How did this come to be?
Was it really just you had an idea and then you're having a drink with Jared Moshe and that was it?
Listen, I'm not going to say that wasn't it, because all it takes is putting your ideas in writing, to make anything start to become real. But the two things that I knew I was feeling a ceiling in costume design for myself. A lot of my goals were being met. I was working with Edgar Wright on Baby Driver, and I just started feeling like, okay, what else is there? What happens in 20 years? What do I really want to do and say? And when I was in high school, I had written a revisionist play about Shakespeare's heroines called Women Are the Weaker Sex. And it was very successful for a 16-year-old. It kind of made its way to all the contests and whatever. And, I kind of got scared of its success and didn't really know, like, what else do I have to say? And I was listening to one of the other podcasts you guys did, and it was talking about how Westerns being so confining ultimately kind of unleash more creativity. And I think there was something within the archetypes of everyone's existence within a Western, and really watching both Kerry Washington and Jennifer Jason Leigh, get the shit kicked out of them every day on set, in a really real way. And those were in very male environments where I was very much in the minority. And it kind of was this combination of my own need to break free from like this gender caste system I was living in as a costume designer, and the sort of parameters I had seen these great actresses sort of be put in these very confined, very abused roles. And it burst out of me, it really did. It just felt like I needed to put a different angle into the world. And I didn't even think like, oh, I'm subverting the genre and all these great things. Like, I feel really lucky. I heard Jordan Peele saw the short and said it was like a Western Get Out, and that's amazing. It's more than I literally once, it caught the attention of people that really said like, oh, it's so subversive. And, for me, I just wanted to tell a story that I hadn't gotten to see in the genre. And that's where the origin of it all came from.
I mean, I guess what really stands out to me is sometimes people do make deliberately subversive genre films, but as you watch them, you can tell they haven't really seen that many films. But you're clearly not that type of filmmaker. So obviously, there are films like Hanny Calder in the past that get to that, but there's no sustained cycle of, let's say, women's revenge westerns.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and then there's a lot of bad ones, the ones that have tried and failed. So sure. I didn't think of anything at the time other than this is a story I want to tell. I wrote it and I immediately wrote it for Laura. I didn't know her, but I just was like, God, Laura Dern would be so good in a Western. And thankfully, it's the Hateful Eight premiere. And what happened was I wrote the short and I really wrote it towards getting into this AFI Women's Directing Workshop, which is a tuition-free program that's harder to get into than Harvard, that's meant for women who have spent a lot of time professionally in the industry, but maybe not as directors. So I really fit the bill as like the perfect candidate. And so I wrote it to apply for this program. And I was seated at the Hateful Eight premiere next to Bruce Dern and Laura Dern. And so I kind of took my shot. I said like, hey, I'm Courtney. And she goes, oh, I know who you are. My dad says you kept him alive during the shooting of Hateful Eight, which was true. If you see in the scene where Chris Mannix gives him a blanket, it's because I said to Quentin, like, Bruce is not going to survive the shoot if we cannot hide an electric blanket on his lap the whole time, and really took care of him. I didn't think anything of it. I just wanted to make sure he made it every day. And so Laura said, oh my God, I know who you are. And I don't even think of you like a friend. I think of you like a sister. And I go, okay, well, sister, you want to be in a Western I wrote for you if I get into this program? And she said, so I'm in the bathroom of the ArcLight at the Dome in the intermission. And it's like, okay, so you go up her, I'm like pitching it to her in the vanity mirror. And she goes, this sounds really cool. Let me know if you get in the program, and I'd love to read the script. So the rest, as they say, is history.
Well, obviously the Western has been for decades a great genre to showcase, let's say mature male stars. But with maybe the exception of Barbara Stanwyck, it hasn't, even though it could have been that kind of showcase for mature women stars. So Dern just seems to sort of prove that the Western just in general is a great showcase for some of our great actors. Yeah,
I mean, and I think just getting that many women together, really was a profound experience. And I brought on all the women from all the sets I'd ever done, who were my favorite gaffer, my favorite sound mixer, every one of them. And it kind of was like the Avengers, of both on screen and off screen, and this little moment of bliss that changed my whole life. And, in the end, Steven Spielberg saw the short, and, Amblin, his company, is all named after his first short. So he, I think, really responded, and he attached me to a feature, and, a lot came from it that I didn't necessarily know, because I just really wanted to tell that story, was it, and one of the other first things that I found was that song that's played in it. So it's called Katie Cruel, and it actually was an 1800s hymn. I just really responded to the lyrics of it. And so those the first image of the movie and that song were sort of my foundation of what the piece could be. And there is a feature in development, and hopefully one day, we are very close to making it a few years ago, and the woes of development took over. And I'm glad in a way that it hasn't happened, because to me, what I want it to be, every Western is representative of the time frame that it was made. And, you see the story of McCarthyism or the Vietnam War in any given Western. And I really want this to speak to the gender parity of this moment in time, and the gender conversation of where we are today, and the fight that, really has been going on, and how it kind of comes to a head. And at the time, if I would have made it when I was supposed to make the feature, it really would have become the Harvey Weinstein Western because of the timing. There was literally a line where, Laura Dern's character said, like, your time's up. And then, like, time's up happens. And I'm like, oh, thank God we didn't make it yet.
Little on the nose.
It would have, and I was before it, Time's Up existed, but like it wouldn't. I want a Western that lives forever, and the best Westerns, the longer they take, and the more you go through to make them, the more grit those characters get. So I'm about to go into a rewrite of it, and have some exciting new producers attached, and really want to have some really cool casting ideas that I'm writing towards. And I feel like my time with this larger format of this film is sort of just beginning again.
It's really, as somebody who studies Westerns, really encouraging to hear you say that, also perceptive, because there's, in terms of the topicality of a Western, there's a difference between, a Western like Soldier Blue, which is a very 70s Western that ages terribly and nobody wants to see because it is so directly tied. And a film like The Wild Bunch, which is, of course, about the time in which it was made, but it's also about the Western much more generally and kind of philosophically. So that is just warms my heart to hear a Western filmmaker realize this.
Yeah, I really want it. I think, there's a reason like that so many, like you said, great filmmakers make one of their greatest films in that genre. And I feel so lucky that I could kind of off the bat work in a place where I have so much passion and experience. And I think that really shined, and it's opened a lot of doors for me. And I have a lot of development and a lot of things going on. But to me, I always go back to it as, like any great Western hero, it's like their big mission, their big goal, their big insurmountable, journey. And to me, in a weird way, Good Time Girls, the feature, has become that. And I know I'll make it in the course of my career. And I've stopped pushing that it happens first or fastest, and really just want it to be the best and live the longest that it can, because like, I'm not here to add to the Rolodex of average female Westerns that have been made, and I want to make sure that it brings people into the genre that haven't been there before, and also really gives it a lot of fresh energy, because I always joke that Westerns are like 50 Shades of Brown. And as you can see from the room I'm sitting in, which is a really my multicolored psychedelic vibe Western space, like I'm not here to make something that looks like everything you've ever seen before.
Well, speaking of the way it looks, visually speaking, The Good Time Girls is gorgeous, which is a testament to you and to your DP, Autumn Durald, who is currently shooting the new Black Panther movie. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
So what can you tell me about working with her on this project?
Yeah, coming from being a department head myself, my department heads are all women who I have been in close relationship with for the course of our careers. So Autumn and I did a film Gia Coppola did called Palo Alto years ago. And of course, she was the most important collaborator that I could think of for this, especially because we were working on 35 millimeter. But we were fortunate enough to also kind of have some mentors in Bob Richardson and Bill Pope. So Bill Pope came and operated the crane for me and her for that first shot. And, Bob gave us a great lesson in like, we wanted to flash the film and really give it like a hint of McCabe and Mrs. Miller vibe, and how far is too far. And he was really great. So we had these wonderful godfathers. Same thing with Quentin and me over on the film. It's like to have these amazing godfathers, but really being on that set, and there's some great, really iconic photos I could share with you of me and Autumn, and we really embodied the men that I have seen doing those roles for the last 20 years, and, sit there and fight like old grumpy, oh no, it should be this, it should be that, and so both her and my production designer, Florencia Martin, whose first design credit, she came from Set Deck, and her first production design credit is Good Time Girls. She just wrapped Paul Thomas Anderson's film as the production designer. She's doing Damien Chazelle's current film as the production designer. And it was funny because like I felt that way with Jared, where I almost, as a designer, I could lap him. So by the time his second film came out, I was already on Hateful Eight, and my first film was with him. And the way that these women and their talent has just flourished, and the amount that we want to reunite, and what happens and what that's going to look like, is really going to be something worth paying attention to. So I just watched them wave from my computer writing away these last 4 years, and I'm like, you bitches better be free when I'm available, because we are going. But they're my forever. I mean, they really are my ride or dies. So I can't wait to be reunited with them.
Oh, where was the film shot?
Big Sky Ranch, right?
So this was filmed at Big Sky, which, we shot some of Django at most famously, the Klan mask scene.
Oh, right.
Which, fun fact, I cut all the holes for the eyes. So technically the whole scene was really about me.
Very rough holes.
Yeah, there was another. Yeah, exactly. Really rough holes all over the place. Poor guys had to ride blind. So yeah, we were there. It was like, being in an extended family, being at Big Sky.
So you mentioned Laura Dern, of course, on the cast, and I think this might have been her first Western.
Yes.
I'm not sure. But somebody who you cast in the film is very familiar to Western fans is Garret Dillahunt, who everybody loves from Deadwood. So
yes.
What was he like on set? What is he like to work with?
I mean, I love Garret. I was so grateful that he came out and did this. And I think anyone who hasn't been in an environment where they're the minority and suddenly is just a little like, what's going on? So he was very generous and very sweet and very outnumbered by women. So he was very respectful and great. And it was really funny because, coming from costumes, I have a tendency to, as I'm giving direction, do last looks on the actor. So I'm like, so for this next scene, and I'm like rolling his sleeve or like touching up the blood. I can't help it. And he's like, will you stop touching me? It was so great. I was like, noted. So now I've been directing commercials and a lot of stuff, a lot of shorter content stuff, and I always laugh because I'm like, hands up. Like, not gonna harass any more of my actors, but I love Garret and he's so good in it, and he was a great sport.
He's both funny and sinister in the film. He really pulls that off, and he does that in a lot of roles. Actually, he's wonderful.
So layered. I love the part when he's like, "You shot me!" Like, when he shoot his
he
hand
looks
at the
offended.
end.
Kind of knitting circle.
Yeah.
Ambush is this.
Ambush. Thank you. Oh my God, you're quoting me.
That is a great line. There's some really terrific lines in that film. You should really be proud of a lot of those.
Thank you.
It's funny the way it goes so grim at times and yet so funny at times. That balance is really, was that a tricky balance to find?
Well, so one of my biggest heroes who's directed a Western we haven't talked about yet is Lena Wertmuller. And Lena Wertmuller was an Italian filmmaker who was the first woman to ever be nominated for an Oscar. And she actually directed the Belle Starr story under a man's pseudonym in '68. And the first half of the movie is incredible. The second half kind of falls apart. But really what her tone did, because it's Italian and, a lot of her films, Love and Anarchy is the most influential to me. When I saw that at Quentin's Theater, the New Beverly, that was the moment I became a director. And she celebrates this wonderful combination of femininity and sort of the humor that women bring, which is like talking too much. And, I always joke like a women's Western is never going to be as quiet as a man's Western, because like we just have a lot more to say. Like we're like, but how I feel in this exact moment, and so really celebrating to me all the things that women are, and that they are, you can go from the love interest and this sexy bedroom vixen to your worst enemy in 2 seconds, and really wanting to, sort of celebrate and laud that dynamic range, so the part when the girls at the end are fighting over who gets to keep their horses before they've even killed him,
the brown one.
That exactly. They're all brown. Exactly. And I think that to me is my voice as a filmmaker and what I want to say about women, which is, we might not always say the right thing at the right place, and we might not be able to out wrestle a man, but we do in our own world have a series of upper hands that we are ready to use and employ at any moment.
That's one thing I've written a little bit about, that one of the, no pun intended, toughest nuts to crack for women Westerns is how do you offer a vision of a kind of active Western femininity that doesn't involve dressing up your women like men and making them do masculine things. And I felt like, there's a few films that have got at this, and I felt like you're right there kind of actually giving us that vision of what a kind of active, really heroic Western femininity might look like that isn't, acting like a man.
Yeah, and it is, it is an exploration that I'm still figuring out, because especially when you try and say if the only thing is that they have against men is like who's a quicker shot, who's a more accurate, it's like I don't know, the stakes of that playing field are less interesting to me than going as granular as how we think and how we see the world and how we can bring out those differences to get our upper hand. And, you know, really the biggest thing with Good Time Girls is you can get them naked. Like, that's just a fact. You know, you can get them with their gun away from you, like, with this skill set. And that's where, to me, sexuality, you know, does play a role in it. And so, you know, the feature is set at a brothel, and really looking at what that set of skills looks like and how to really get that upper hand. But I agree with you. I think it's something that I will probably continue to explore and figure out until you get to watch the feature in theaters near you, you know?
When you talked about how they are able to get the upper hand by getting the men naked, what comes to mind is that bathtub scene, which is so harrowing in the film. Is one of the I'd say along with Last House on the Left, it might be one of the best castration scenes of all time.
It's like I Spit on Your Grave level.
Yeah, it's right up there. So what was that? I have to know what's going on in the set when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, what's even funnier is a step further back than that, which was I had it that, you know, she like guts him, and she was a butcher. So I had that she guts him, and I shared the script with Quentin, and his only note is if she's giving him a hand job and she's in the bathtub, then why isn't she cutting off his dick? And I was like, Quentin, I can't be a female filmmaker who cuts a penis off in my first film. They'll never forgive me. Sure enough, my dad honestly has never forgiven me for that. He literally is like, except that scene, it's so upsetting. And so I was just like, of course, that was my first instinct, but I just need to know, like, metaphysically, like, who am I? What does that say? And then I was just like, okay, I can't, the point is to own my own voice. And that was my instinct. And he kind of in a wonderful way kind of just gave me the permission to do it, because I don't know, I just from a heady place was like, am I going to be in this, like, you know, movie jail from every male executive I need to hire me if I'm like cutting dicks off at the beginning of my career? But, you know, it worked out, and it made a really strong impression. Right. And, you know, the actors, Alia Shawkat, who's in that scene, and Jason, who plays the unfortunate man, they were so wonderful. And the blood gag, I mean, there's so many photos on the set where I practiced the blood gag, and it's just like the most hilarious thing to see the director like miming. So I'm like, the knife goes in, the bathtub fills with blood, more blood, and it really worked. You know, it just did. Everyone,
it's that overhead shot, that looking directly down on them from above, just so disturbing.
The soapy water. The white and the red.
Awful.
I just really wanted a bathtub to fill with blood. And also for me, I don't know, you know, I'm not very interested in overly graphic violence. I like my violence to feel almost a little feminine. So if you look at the blood on the floral wallpaper and a lot of the ways that I personally love blood and violence, like, there is a flair to me of femininity within it, and the way that the red kind of takes over to feel more like painterly, you know. And I think a lot of great Westerns, it's not about how graphic something feels. You know, there are more realistic Westerns that do it so well, like The Proposition, or something that feels so vital. But then there are ways that, you know, Sam Peckinpah, like, we all know The Wild Bunch, like, all that violence at the end looks like shit. That blood does not look good. It's like so red painty. It's just, but you don't care. You know, you're in it for the journey. So that was really important to me, to find my own language of blood after working in Quentin's worlds for so long, and really being able to define my own voice.
So you handed over the costuming on the film to somebody else. It doesn't sound like that was a particularly difficult decision to make. Like, that is
no, it was, I mean, look, luckily it was my assistant who's gone on to become a costume designer in her own right, Anastasia Magudas, and, you know, it was as if I costume designed it. You know, I am in every fitting, but so was Quentin, you know, so is Edgar. A lot of the best auteurs are in the fittings with you because they don't want to miss the moment that their character takes their first steps, literally, in their shoes, you know. So I was very involved. I'm very hands-on on everything I do. I don't wish I was my costume designer, because when it's not Anastasia, who is like an extension of me, it's definitely a department I give a lot of run for its money, but I'm very specific and I don't ask for things I don't know can be accomplished, you know. So it's definitely, I'll always have a very heavy hand in there.
Another really audacious moment in the film is the final credits. You do this long extended take of her riding off, and we just hold on that moment. It's like the third man. It just goes on and on and on. It's wonderful. I was so glad that you let that play out. What were your thoughts there?
I mean, I knew I wanted a great credit sequence because I'm all about crew, you know? Movies are not made without a lot of people's contributions, and no matter short or long format, I can't wait in features, especially when I do my Western feature. I want the credits to come at the front, like the great Westerns have, because I think it's important that you see right off the bat, like, this is not just about these actors you're going to see. It's not just about how great the performances are. It's the work of a lot of people coming together. So I knew I wanted a great credit sequence. I think of credit sequences, you know, even as I write things. And, you know, really, it was amazing because that is the length of time of that shot. And what happened was something got in the film canister, so the scratching on it is real scratching because the shot actually got totally fucked up with these like little dirt rocks or whatever. So you see these flashes, and it was just the most perfect combination of like film, great horseback riding, great shots. And also I was like, if we're getting a crane for the opening scene, I need to use this crane for something else. So it was sort of how it was birthed, and I'm glad you appreciate it. It really, I laugh because I'm like, it's a 12-minute film with 3 minutes of credits, but I'm not going to ever, I mean, everybody there worked for free, so I would never not have every person's name there.
So to wrap things up, in your opinion, what is it about the Western movie genre that continues to attract world-class filmmakers like Tarantino and Kelly Reichardt and the Coen brothers, as well as bold new filmmakers like you and Jared Moshe and Emma Tammy? In other words, why do these American myths still speak to artists like yourself?
I mean, I think you referring to them as myths is exactly right. You know, to me, Westerns are America's Greek mythology. And within those stories is every story that's relevant to any part of our lives. So really working with the set of archetypes and the sort of set of how America became the country we live in today. And if you look at the themes, you know, whether it's gun control, abuse of natural resources, relationships to minorities, women's role in the workplace and in life, I mean, all of these things that our country was founded on are the exact same struggles that we are built on today. And to me, really looking at the mythology of the white male hero and trying to figure out like how that rise and that iconography came to be and how we get to reinvent it for today is an incredibly exciting challenge. And that's what draws me again and again back to the genre. And if you look at, you know, how much it speaks to people, whether you're at a bar and you see a bunch of people in cowboy hats, you know, like the cowboy myth is still so prevalent and still so visceral. And really, to me, is the America that we have inherited, and really taking a look at how to reformat that and recreate that for today's audience and for the problems that we're facing today is one of the most exciting prospects as a storyteller.
Well, Courtney, I just want to thank you again for speaking with us today about your work. The costumes you've designed are truly remarkable, and your transition to directing just couldn't be more exciting. Personally, I can't wait to see what you do in the future. I hope to see a Good Time Girls feature one day. I think that would just be phenomenal. So it's just been a real pleasure having you today on the show.
Thank you so much. And I love your guys' passion for Westerns. And, you know, I look forward to how the conversation continues to shape and change into the future.
Amazing. Thank you, Courtney.
Thanks, guys.
Well, that wraps up our show. But before you go, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find us at Western Podcast. That's at, as in the @ symbol, Western Podcast, all one word. And if you enjoy our show and want to help support it, the best way to do that is by subscribing to it on whatever platform you use. Simply click the subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode. And with that said, until next time, I'm Matthew Chernoff,
And I'm Andrew Patrick Nelson, and you've been listening to How the West Was Cast.
Well, that was our show. We thank you kindly for listening and hope you'll come back again real soon. Till then, keep your saddle oiled and your guns greased. We'll be seeing you.